Before we delve into this gripping narrative, please share in the comments where you're tuning in from to experience this poignant tale. The bathroom door. The sound of the rain tapping against the window had always been comforting to 8-year-old Sophie. On stormy evenings like this, her dad would usually sit by the couch, telling her stories about brave heroes who faced impossible odds but always came out victorious. Those stories made her believe that no matter how scary things got, there was always a way out. But tonight, Sophie was alone. The bathroom felt smaller than it usually did, the walls cold and uninviting. She pulled her knees to her chest, sitting on the edge of the bathtub, staring at the locked door. Outside, the faint hum of thunder rumbled in the distance, growing louder with each passing moment. She could hear the faint ticking of the clock in the hallway. Her dad was supposed to be home by now. He had promised. Sophie's fingers traced the grooves on the cold porcelain of the tub. She tried to stay calm, repeating the stories her dad used to tell her in her mind, trying to hold on to the comfort they always brought. But something was wrong. The evening that went wrong. It had started as any other evening. Her dad had kissed her on the forehead before heading out for his night shift at the warehouse. "Be good, Soph," he had said, ruffling her hair. "I'll be back by 10. Lock the doors, and don't forget to leave a light on." Sophie had nodded, already engrossed in her coloring book. She liked the evenings when her dad had the night shift. It meant she got the TV all to herself, and she could stay up late pretending to be brave, even though she always turned on all the lights. But tonight, something had felt off. At around 8:00 p.m., as she was watching her favorite cartoon, there had been a sound, a faint tapping. At first, she thought it was the wind. The storm outside was growing stronger, and the trees often scratched against the windows when it got windy. But this sound was different. It was rhythmic, deliberate, as if someone was testing the windows. Sophie had frozen, her heart thumping in her chest. She grabbed the remote and muted the TV, straining to hear. For a few moments, there was nothing, just the rain. And then the sound came again. This time, it wasn't at the window. It was at the back door. A growing fear. Sophie's dad had always told her to stay calm in emergencies. "If you panic," he had said, "your brain doesn't work as well. Breathe, Soph. Just breathe and think." So that's what she did. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her shaking hands. She grabbed her dad's old phone from the counter. It didn't have service, but it could still call 911. She tiptoed to the hallway, peeking toward the back door. The porch light was on, but it didn't make her feel any safer. The storm made everything look strange, shadows dancing in ways that didn't feel natural. And then she saw it. The handle of the back door was moving. The bathroom refuge. Sophie didn't think. She ran. She bolted down the hallway and into the bathroom, slamming the door behind her and locking it. Her breaths came in short, panicked gasps as she pressed her back against the door, as if her small frame could keep whatever was out there from coming in. Her fingers fumbled with the phone. She pressed the numbers -911 and brought the phone to her ear, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear. The ringing seemed to go on forever. 911. "What's your emergency?" The voice on the other end was calm, steady, a lifeline in the chaos. Sophie's voice shook as she spoke. I'm alone, and someone's trying to get in." The operator's tone immediately shifted, becoming softer but no less serious. "Sweetheart, are you safe right now? Can you tell me where you are?" "I'm in the bathroom," Sophie whispered. "The door is locked. My daddy isn't home yet." The operator's voice was soothing, but Sophie could hear the urgency behind it. "Okay, you're doing great. What's your name?" "Sophie." "Hi, Sophie. My name is Grace. I'm here to help you. Can you tell me your address?" Sophie recited it, her voice trembling. "Good job, Sophie. Officers are on their way right now. I need you to stay as quiet as you can, okay? Can you tell me what's happening?" Sophie took a shaky breath, trying to steady herself. There was someone at the back door. They were trying to open it. Okay, Sophie, I understand. You're very brave for calling me. Can you hear anything now? Sophie froze, straining to listen. The rain pounded against the windows. The thunder growled in the distance. But then there it was. Footsteps. They weren't loud. Whoever it was, they were trying to be quiet. But the house was old, and the creak of the floorboards gave them away. They're inside, Sophie whispered, her voice barely audible. Grace's tone remained calm, but there was an edge to it now. Okay, Sophie, listen to me. You're doing so well. Stay as quiet as you can. Keep the door locked, and don't move. Help is coming. A lesson in courage. As Sophie sat there, clutching the phone to her chest, she remembered something her dad had told her. Courage isn't about not being scared, Soph. It's about doing the right thing, even when you're scared. She was scared now, more scared than she had ever been. But she wasn't alone. Grace was still on the line, her steady voice guiding Sophie through the fear. You're so brave, Sophie, Grace said. I'm staying with you until the officers get there. You're not alone. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Sophie squeezed her eyes shut, clutching the phone as if it were a lifeline. And then, suddenly, a loud knock echoed through the house. Sophie, it's the police. Her eyes snapped open. Relief flooded her chest. They're here, she whispered. Grace's voice was warm, reassuring. Good job, Sophie. You're safe now. Can you unlock the door for them? Sophie hesitated, listening closely. The intruder's footsteps were gone. She stood on shaky legs, her hand fumbling with the bathroom lock. When she opened the door, 2 officers stood there, their faces kind but serious. You're safe now, one of them said, kneeling to meet her eyes. Sophie nodded, tears streaming down her face. But deep down, she knew the truth. She wasn't just safe because of the police. She was safe because she had been brave enough to call for help. And this was only the beginning of what would become the most unforgettable night of her life. Shadows in the hallway. The officers moved quickly, their boots clicking against the hardwood floor as they began searching the house. Sophie sat on the couch in the living room, wrapped in a blanket one of the officers had handed her. The warmth of the fabric did little to soothe the chill that had settled deep in her bones. The storm outside hadn't let up, the rain streaking down the windows in chaotic patterns. Sophie's eyes darted toward the hallway leading to the bathroom, half expecting to see a shadow lurking there. Every creak of the old house made her jump, her heart racing despite the fact that the police were there. One of the officers, a kind-looking woman with dark brown hair pulled into a bun, crouched down in front of her. Her name tag read Officer Harris. Sophie, she said gently, her voice soft enough to make Sophie feel a little safer. Can you tell me exactly what you saw tonight? Sophie nodded, gripping the edges of the blanket tightly. I was watching TV, and I heard a sound, like someone tapping on the window. At first, I thought it was the rain, but then it moved to the back door. I saw the handle moving, like someone was trying to get in. Officer Harris nodded encouragingly. You're doing great. Did you see anyone? A face, maybe. Sophie shook her head. No, I just saw the handle. And then I heard footsteps. That's when I called 911. Smart girl, Harris said, smiling faintly. You did exactly what you were supposed to do. That was very brave of you. Sophie didn't feel brave. She felt small and scared and confused. Did they get in? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Harris hesitated, glancing at her partner, a tall man named Officer Daniels, who was shining a flashlight into the dark corners of the kitchen. We're still looking, she said, her tone measured. But you're safe now. I promise. An empty house, or so it seemed. As the officers continued their sweep, Sophie sat quietly, her knees pulled to her chest. She could hear their voices echoing faintly from the other rooms, low and steady as they called out to one another. All clear in the kitchen. Back doors locked, but there are scratches on the frame. Someone tried to force it open. Check the windows. They might have come in through one of them. The words sent a shiver down Sophie's spine. She couldn't stop replaying the events in her mind. The sound of the handle, the creak of the floorboards, the sheer terror of realizing someone was inside her house. But now, sitting here with the police just a few feet away, another thought began to creep into her mind. Why had the person come here? Why her house? Her dad wasn't home, and the lights in the living room had been on. Whoever it was must have known someone was inside. So why had they tried to break in anyway? A clue in the dark. Sophie, Officer Daniels called out, stepping back into the living room. Did your dad mention anything unusual before he left? Anyone stopping by? A delivery? Anything like that? Sophie shook her head. No, he just said he'd be back by 10. Daniels frowned, glancing at Harris. Something doesn't add up, he muttered, but Sophie caught the words anyway. What do you mean? She asked, her voice trembling. Harris crouched down beside her again, her expression kind but serious. We found scratches on the back door, like someone was trying to break in. But whoever it was didn't actually get inside. The house is empty. Sophie's brows furrowed. But I heard footsteps. They were inside. I'm sure of it. Harris exchanged a look with Daniels. Sometimes, when we're scared, our minds can play tricks on us, she said gently. It's possible you heard the wind, or the house settling. No, Sophie said, her voice firm despite the fear in her chest. I know what I heard. Someone was inside. I could feel it. The officers didn't argue, but Sophie could tell they weren't convinced. But she knew. Someone had been there. And they weren't just trying to break in. A missing piece. As the officers wrapped up their search, they turned their attention to the back door. Harris knelt down, running her fingers over the scratches on the frame. Whoever did this was in a hurry, she murmured. They didn't take their time, didn't use any tools, just brute force. Daniels nodded, shining his flashlight along the floor. And no footprints leading away from the house. The rains washed everything clean. Harris glanced toward the windows. It's almost like they wanted to scare her. Sophie's stomach twisted at the words. Why would they want to scare me? She asked, her voice small. Harris hesitated. We don't know for sure, Sophie. It could have just been someone looking for an easy target. An empty house, maybe. But Sophie wasn't so sure. Her dad always double-checked the locks before leaving. He had taught her to do the same. Their house wasn't an easy target. Whoever had come here had a reason. The missing father. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, Sophie began to feel the weight of exhaustion settling over her. The adrenaline that had kept her going earlier was fading, leaving her body heavy and her mind foggy. But one thought kept her awake. Her dad wasn't home yet. Why isn't my dad here? She asked softly, her voice trembling. Harris' expression softened. He's probably just running late, Sophie. The storm might have slowed him down. But Daniels didn't look so sure. We've been trying to reach him, he said carefully, but his phone's going straight to voicemail. Sophie's heart sank. Her dad always called if he was running late. He never left her waiting like this. Do you think? She hesitated, her throat tightening. Do you think something happened to him? Harris reached out, resting a reassuring hand on Sophie's shoulder. We don't know that, Sophie, but we're going to do everything we can to find him, okay? Sophie nodded, but the fear in her chest didn't go away. Something wasn't right. Her dad wasn't just late. He was missing. And somehow, she knew that the person who had tried to break into their house was connected. The phone that rang in the dark. The sound of rain pounding against the windows filled the house, a relentless rhythm that matched Sophie's growing unease. She sat curled on the couch, her hands gripping the blanket tightly. The warmth of the fabric did little to calm the chill that had settled deep in her chest. Her dad wasn't home, and no one seemed to know why. Officer Harris was crouched by the back door, examining the scratches on the frame again. Officer Daniels paced near the kitchen, his flashlight cutting through the shadows as he muttered into his radio. Sophie watched them silently, the fear in her chest growing heavier with each passing minute. The house felt too quiet, despite the rain. Too still, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And then it did. A phone left behind. Found something, Daniels called from the hallway. His voice was steady but carried an edge of urgency. Harris straightened, her hand instinctively moving to her holstered flashlight. "What is it?" Daniels emerged from the hallway, holding up a cell phone. Sophie's heart skipped a beat. "That's my dad's," she blurted, sitting up straight. The officers exchanged a glance. Harris approached Daniels, taking the phone from his hand and inspecting it. "Where did you find this?" "Under the coat rack," Daniels replied, his brow furrowed, like it was dropped in a hurry. Harris turned to Sophie. "Did your dad leave his phone here tonight?" Sophie shook her head, her voice trembling. "No, he always takes it with him to work. He never forgets it." The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. If her dad had taken his phone when he left, how had it ended up back in the house? The message. Harris pressed the power button on the phone. The screen lit up, and Sophie's heart sank when she saw the cracks spider webbing across the glass. The device had clearly been dropped, hard. Harris scrolled through the phone, her expression growing darker with each passing second. "There's a missed call," she said, her voice calm but tight. "From who?" Daniels asked, stepping closer. Harris turned the phone to show him. "Unknown number. Came in about 15 minutes ago." 15 minutes ago. Sophie's eyes widened. "That's after I called 911. Daniels frowned. "Play it." Harris tapped the screen, her thumb hovering over the voicemail icon. For a moment, the room was completely silent except for the rain outside. Then she pressed play. A garbled, static-filled recording crackled through the speaker. At first, it was hard to make out anything. But then, faintly, came the sound of a man's voice. Sophie's heart raced. It was her dad. "Help." The voice was weak, barely audible over the static. "They, coming, home." The recording cut off abruptly. Sophie's breath hitched. "That's him. That's my dad." Harris knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Sophie, do you recognize anything else in the message? Any sounds? Anything that might tell us where he is?" Sophie closed her eyes, trying to focus. She replayed the message in her mind, listening carefully to the faint background noises, the crackle of static, the muffled thud of something heavy. And then, just before the message ended, a sharp metallic clang. Her eyes snapped open. The warehouse. "He works at the warehouse by the docks." That sound. It's the metal doors there. I've heard it before when I've gone with him. Daniels was already reaching for his radio. "Dispatch. We've got a lead. Possible location of a missing person at the East Harbor warehouse. Requesting immediate backup." A race against time. The next few minutes passed in a blur. Sophie sat on the couch, her knees pulled to her chest, as the officers gathered their gear. Harris crouched in front of her one last time. "Sophie, we're going to check the warehouse. Backup is already on the way. I promise, we'll do everything we can to find your dad." Sophie nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. "Please, just bring him back." Harris gave her a reassuring smile. "You've been so brave tonight. We'll take it from here, okay?" But as the officers headed for the door, Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Her dad had left his phone behind. Someone had been in the house, and now he was missing. This wasn't just a random break-in. Someone had come for her dad. And Sophie had a sinking feeling that whoever it was, they weren't done yet. The silent dread. As the police car pulled away, Sophie sat in the quiet house, the blanket still wrapped tightly around her. The rain had begun to let up, the storm fading into a soft drizzle, but the unease in her chest only grew stronger. She glanced toward the hallway where Daniels had found the phone. The coat rack stood empty now, the faint outline of dust on the floor where her dad's phone had been dropped. Her mind raced, piecing together everything that had happened. The footsteps in the house, the scratches on the door, the voicemail. And then it hit her. The voicemail had been left after she called 911. Whoever had taken her dad had known he wasn't home. But they had still come to the house. Why? Her stomach twisted as the realization dawned on her. They hadn't just been after her dad. They had been after her. Echoes in the warehouse. The East Harbor warehouse was a sprawling structure of rusted steel and chipped paint, standing like a ghost from an industrial past. The rain had slowed to a mist, but the air remained thick with dampness and tension. Officer Harris and Officer Daniels pulled up to the gravel lot, their headlights cutting through the fog that rolled in from the nearby docks. The warehouse loomed ahead, its towering metal doors slightly ajar. A soft creak echoed through the air as the wind pushed them back and forth. "This is it," Harris said, her voice low but steady. "Dispatch confirmed this location is tied to previous reports of suspicious activity." Daniels checked his flashlight, then his sidearm. "Let's stay sharp. If Sophie's dad is here, we need to find him fast." Harris nodded, her eyes scanning the perimeter. The place was eerily quiet, save for the occasional drip of water from the warehouse gutters. The faint smell of salt and oil lingered in the air, a reminder of its proximity to the harbor. The two officers approached the entrance cautiously, their footsteps muffled by the wet gravel. Harris pushed the door open further, her flashlight sweeping through the darkness inside. What they saw made them freeze, signs of a struggle. The interior of the warehouse was vast and cold, the dim light from the high windows barely illuminating the space. Stacks of old crates and rusting machinery filled the room, casting long, jagged shadows. Near the center of the warehouse, a chair lay tipped over on its side. A length of rope was coiled loosely nearby, as if it had been hastily discarded. Harris crouched down, her gloved fingers brushing the edge of the rope. "Someone was tied up here," she said, her voice tense. Daniel stepped closer, shining his flashlight on the ground. Scuff marks and smeared dirt suggested a struggle. Nearby, a wrench lay abandoned, its surface stained with something dark. "Looks like there was a fight," Daniels muttered, but no sign of where they went. Harris straightened, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the room. "We need to check the rest of the building. If they moved him, there might be more evidence." A voice in the shadows. As they moved deeper into the warehouse, a faint noise broke the silence. Harris froze, holding up a hand to stop Daniels. The sound came again, soft, muffled. A voice. "Help!" Harris's heart raced. It was faint, almost drowned out by the creak of the building settling, but it was unmistakable. "That's him," she whispered. The officers followed the sound, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. The voice grew louder as they approached a side room tucked away behind a row of machinery. "Help me." Harris pushed the door open, and there he was, Sophie's dad. He was slumped against the wall, his wrists bound with duct tape, his face pale and bruised. His eyes blinked weakly as the light hit him, and for a moment, he looked like he didn't recognize them. "Mr. Carter," Harris said, kneeling beside him. "We're here to help. Can you hear me?" His gaze focused, and he nodded weakly. They took her." Harris's stomach dropped. Who did they take?" He struggled to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. "They were looking for Sophie. They thought I knew where she was." Daniels cursed under his breath. "They came to the house for her. They must have realized she was alone." Harris's mind raced. "But they didn't find her," she said. "She locked herself in the bathroom and called us. That's why they left in a hurry." Mr. Carter's eyes widened slightly. "She's safe." "Yes," Harris said firmly. "She's safe, but we need to get you out of here and figure out who did this." The unseen threat. As Daniels cut the tape from Mr. Carter's wrists, Harris's radio crackled to life. "Officer Harris, we've received a report." The dispatcher's voice was drowned out by a sudden, sharp noise. A metallic clang echoed through the warehouse, followed by the sound of footsteps. Harris and Daniels exchanged a glance. "They're still here," Daniels said, his hand moving to his holster. Harris turned to Mr. Carter. "Stay here. We'll handle this." He nodded weakly, his body too battered to argue. The officers moved cautiously through the warehouse, their flashlights cutting through the shadows. The sound of footsteps grew fainter, leading them toward the back of the building. But then, just as they reached the far corner, the footsteps stopped. The silence was deafening. And that's when they realized. The intruders weren't running. They were circling back at the house. Sophie sat curled on the couch, her eyes fixed on the clock. Every second felt like an eternity. The officers had promised to find her dad, but the unease in her chest refused to go away. She couldn't stop thinking about the voicemail, the way his voice had sounded so weak, so desperate. And then she heard it. A noise. It was faint, almost imperceptible over the sound of the rain, but it was there. A creak. Her heart pounded as she looked toward the hallway. The house was supposed to be empty. The police had searched every room, checked every lock. But now, as she stared into the shadows, she was certain she wasn't alone. Sophie took a deep breath, her dad's words echoing in her mind. Courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing the right thing, even when you are. Her hands trembled as she reached for the phone. And just as she pressed the numbers -911, a shadow moved across the hallway. The final stand. The shadow moved across the hallway, slow and deliberate. Sophie's breath caught in her chest, but she forced herself to stay quiet. She crouched behind the couch, her fingers gripping the edge of her dad's phone. The line to 911 was still open, the operator's calm voice whispering through the speaker. "Officers are on their way, Sophie. Stay hidden and stay quiet," the operator reassured her. The faint creak of a floorboard made Sophie's heart race. Whoever was in the house wasn't in a hurry. They were moving carefully, like they were searching for something or someone. She bit her lip to keep from crying. Her dad wasn't here to protect her, but his words echoed in her mind again. Courage is doing the right thing, even when you're scared. Sophie tightened her grip on the phone. She wasn't just scared, she was terrified. But she wasn't going to let that stop her. A moment of bravery. The shadow grew larger as the figure moved closer to the living room. Sophie knew she couldn't stay hidden forever. She needed to act. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for something, anything, she could use to protect herself. That's when she spotted it, the heavy ceramic lamp on the side table. Taking a deep breath, Sophie crept toward the table, her movements slow and deliberate. Her small hands wrapped around the lamp's base, and she pulled it toward her, careful not to make a sound. The shadow was in the doorway now. Sophie's heart pounded as she gripped the lamp tightly. She could see the figure now, a man in dark clothes, his face partially obscured by a hood. He stepped into the room, his eyes scanning the shadows. She didn't give herself time to hesitate. With all her strength, Sophie swung the lamp, sending it crashing into the man's arm. He let out a yell, stumbling back as the lamp shattered on the floor. Sophie didn't wait to see what would happen next. She bolted toward the front door, her bare feet slapping against the hardwood floor. The man recovered quickly, his heavy footsteps thundering behind her. Sophie's hand fumbled with the lock, her heart pounding as she struggled to turn it. And then, just as the man reached out to grab her, the blaring sound of sirens filled the air. Help arrives. Red and blue lights flooded the windows as police cars screeched to a stop in front of the house. Sophie flung the door open, tears streaming down her face as she ran outside. Two officers rushed toward her, their expressions grim as they shielded her behind them. "He's inside," Sophie cried, pointing toward the living room. The officers didn't hesitate. They stormed into the house, their voices commanding as they shouted for the intruder to surrender. Sophie stood trembling on the porch, watching as more officers arrived. One of them crouched beside her, his voice calm and steady. "You're safe now," he said gently. "You did so well." Sophie nodded, but her mind was still racing. Her dad, was he okay? Reunion at the warehouse. Meanwhile, at the warehouse, Harris and Daniels had cornered the remaining intruders. They moved methodically, their flashlights cutting through the dark corners of the building. "You're surrounded," Harris shouted, her voice firm. "Come out with your hands up." There was a pause, and then slowly, two men emerged from behind a stack of crates. Their hands were raised, their expressions grim. Harris kept her weapon trained on them as Daniels moved in to secure them. "Where's the girl's father?" Harris demanded. One of the men sneered. "He's back in the side room. But you're too late. He's already told us what we wanted to know." Harris's eyes narrowed. "And what's that?" The man didn't answer, but his smirk said it all. Harris didn't waste any more time. She and Daniels rushed back to where they had left Mr. Carter. He was still slumped against the wall, but his eyes lit up when he saw them. "My daughter," he rasped. "Is she safe?" "She's safe," Harris said firmly, helping him to his feet. "And we're taking you to her." The truth revealed. Back at the house, Sophie clung to her dad as he stepped out of the police car, his arms wrapped tightly around her. "I'm so sorry, Soph," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "I didn't mean to leave you alone. I never should have." "It's okay, Daddy," Sophie said, her voice muffled against his chest. "You're here now." As the officers questioned the captured intruders, the truth began to unfold. Mr. Carter had unknowingly stumbled upon something at his job, a shipment of illegal goods hidden in the warehouse. When he refused to cooperate with the criminals behind it, they decided to use the one thing they thought could break him: Sophie. But their plan had backfired. Sophie's quick thinking and courage had saved not only herself, but also her dad. A lesson in courage. That night, as the house grew quiet again, Sophie and her dad sat together on the couch. The storm had passed, leaving the world outside calm and still. "You were so brave," her dad said, his voice full of pride. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Sophie looked up at him, her eyes wide but steady. "You always told me to be brave, even when I'm scared. I just remembered that." Her dad pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "You're my hero, Soph." Sophie smiled, but her mind was already racing with thoughts of the future. She had faced her fears and come out stronger. And now she knew that no matter what challenges came her way, she had the courage to overcome them. Because sometimes heroes aren't the ones with capes. Sometimes they're just kids who refuse to give up, even when the world feels scary. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.